Andy Dufresne is sitting in a courtroom being prosecuted for killing his wife and her lover. Andy begs innocent, claiming he wanted to shoot his wife after he found out she cheated on him, but walked away and threw the gun he had in a river. The judge and jury did not believe him, so Andy was sentenced to 2 life sentences in Shawshank prison. We meet Red, who is shown being denied his freedom. The audience finds out that Red is known to be the smuggler in Shawshank, and he does not think much of Andy when he comes in. The prison is extremely dehumanizing and strict. The warden says they focus on religion and discipline. A large man is scared on the first night he is there, and the man in the cell next to him eggs him on until he breaks. The officer hears him and beats the man until he is silent. The next morning, Andy gives some food to Brooks, an old man who gives the food to a small bird in his pocket. Andy asks Red to get him a small rock hammer, and Red agrees. When Red gets the hammer, he laughs at how small it is and thinks it is a joke. Sometime later, Andy is alone until a group of men come up to him and jump him. Red realizes this and bribes the police to give him and his friends a nicer working opportunity. While the men are working, Andy overhears the police officer having money troubles and offers to help since he was a previous banker. Andy and Red begin to open up to each other and really have a friendship. That night, Andy begins to carve chess pieces with his rock hammer and decides to carve his name into a wall. Once again, Andy gets brutally beaten and has to spend a month in the infirmary. The man who was in charge of the beatings got horribly messed up by the police officers to the point where he would never be able to walk again. When Andy got back from the infirmary, he sees his friends corrected rocks for him so that he could carve chess pieces, and Red gives him a poster of a girl they think is attractive. Andy gets his room deeply searched, and the officers find his posters and chess pieces. Andy recites a Bible verse to Warden, where after the warden calls Andy to his office to let him know he no longer has to work in the laundry room and is allowed to work with Brooks in the library. An officer approaches Andy and asks if he can help him set up a trust fund for his son. Andy has an idea for a project in the library and asks the warden for some money to fund the project. He says no, but agrees to mail Andy's letters to the state to ask for a larger budget, so Andy begins to send them 1 letter per week. Suddenly, we hear that Brooks is going crazy and trying to stab one of their friends. We see that Brooks is being released out of prison after being there for 50 years, and he does not want to leave. Brooks does not know what to do with himself, and when he gets out, he is sad, lonely, and depressed. He writes a letter back to his friends at Shawshank, and we then see that Brooks takes his own life. Back at Shawshank, Andy gets his grant for the library funds. Once again, Red got rejected from being able to leave Shawshank, and Andy gives him a harmonica, which he is never able to bring himself to play. The prison gets an opportunity to work outside, but we begin to see a glimpse of Warden's corruptness. There's a new guy coming to Shawshank, and at first Andy seems to not take a liking to him. But then we see that he takes him under his wing and teaches him how to read. Tommy, the new guy, reveals that he knows the true killer of Andy's wife and his lover. Andy goes to the warden and asks for permission to go to trial with this new information, and the warden gets very defensive and extremely mad when Andy said he would never mention the money of Shawshank if he ever got put out. Andy gets put into solitary confinement by the warden, and the warden takes Tommy outside where he manipulates him into thinking they're having a civil conversation and are going to take Andy's wife's killer to trial. Until all of a sudden, after the conversation, the warden commands the officers to shoot Tommy. After Andy gets out of solitary confinement, he is shook. Andy tells Red about his dreams for when he gets out to live in Mexico and fix up a boat. Andy asks Red to do him a favor if he ever gets out. Andy is tired of the warden, and we see him tightly grabbing a rope in his cell. Red stays up all night thinking that Andy is going to live into his life. The next morning, Andy's body is completely gone. There is no body in the cell. The warden is furious and demands to know where he went, but no one knows, not even Red. They all find out over the past 20 years Andy has been digging a hole with his rock hammer through the wall to escape, and finally he executed his plan. Andy ratted out the warden and everyone else who was corrupt in Shawshank, which resulted in the warden shooting himself. Shortly after, Red is released from prison, and it appears that he will have the same fate as Brooke, but decides to live out his promise to Andy, so he goes to the spot where Andy told him to go and finds a letter that Andy left him asking Red to come to Mexico. Red sees Andy fixing up his boat, and the two reunite. Shawshank Redemption was exceptional in many different categories. Firstly, the acting and the characters was insane. Each character had a different emotion attached to them, and the actors were able to portray each character's hardships perfectly. The whole time I believed this movie was based on a true story because of how real everyone's emotions were. The performances were not only moving within the main characters, but also the ones that were not so focused on. For example, James Whitmore's performance of Brooks brought me to tears by the end of this time. He built such a loving connection with the audience, and when he passed by his own choices, one could not help but sympathize with him. Another part of the film which really caught my attention was the pacing. To cover 20 years in 2.5 hours is difficult, but I thought Frank Darabont executed it perfectly. The stories unfold without a minute of boredom or a sense of forgottenness. Shawshank is directed based off of the Stephen King book Rita Hayworth and Shawshank Redemption. The film did inspire various different types of films to come. For example, narration became much more popular, along with a stronger emphasis on character development, and lastly, more adaptations of Stephen King's works, specifically his dramas and not so much his horrors, came to life. Unfortunately, at the Oscars, Shawshank Redemption went 0-7, with Forrest Gump trumping most of the categories, but I think they should have won at least a few awards considering how impactful the film would come to be. Overall, I do not have any negative critiques. The cinematography, acting, and directing was just phenomenal, and I cannot wait to watch this film again. The characters were great, and the directing was just as good. I do not think it was possible to be bored during this film with something happening all the time. Overall, I give it a 4.5 out of 5 stars.